YouTube, you wanted budget decks, and here I am bringing you two different versions of the Nova Grappler Hero budget deck that you can play in this format. Now the first version I'm going to show you is going to be a completely common and rare version, and I took a variant of this into my shop tournament. Now you might think that this deck really doesn't match up against all the fully built Kagero, Royal Paladin, OTT, and Nova Grappler decks. And you'd be right. But during the shop tournament, I actually managed to push two full built Royal Paladins to 5 damage, and well, I'd like to think that I managed to do quite a lot of damage and push them so that they had to really think about what they were doing rather than just rolling over this budget deck. Now, I'm going to be showing you the common and rare version. So starting off, we have 4 of your main Vanguard unit, Battledore Fighter. Now, Battledore Fighter has the Excel gift marker, and he's going to be your main ride that you want to get. And his skills are on the Vanguard circle. Once per turn, you can Counterblast and Soul Blast 1, pick a unit, and for that turn, when that unit attacks, it has to be guarded with at least 2 cards, which means even if it's just a 5k guard, the opponent has to drop 2 cards to guard that attack. Now, you may think that this is not really that useful because, that opponent would just take the damage. But when you can push your opponent to 5 damage and they have to guard the next card, this skill becomes very potent, especially with another one of the cards you'll be seeing later. And his second skill works on Vanguard and Rearguard. If you have at least 3 Rearguards, he gains plus 5,000 power when he attacks. Very handy for getting that 17 mark on his own, and he can be used in Vanguard and Rearguard, so makes him pretty useful, especially if he's on an Excel gift marker, which brings him up to 27, and you can hit your opponent for, well, your non-force imaginary gift opponent, so your Protect and Excel gift marker opponents for those magic numbers. But moving on, I also play for Miss Splendor. Now, you may think that Battledore Fighter is the most important card in the deck, but in truth, Miss Splendor is the most important card in the deck, because of her skill works on Vanguard and Rearguard circles. When you have a hero that attacks, and you can tell it's a hero by that race here, so that says human and / hero. If you look at Battledore Fighter, he says the same thing. So that the second for katakana there, say hero. And her skill is that when you have more rearguards than your opponent, when she attacks, or when any hero attacks, your opponent can't intercept. So first of all, the intercepts are shut down. Second of all, when that unit attacks, if you have more rearguards than your opponent, it gains plus 3,000 power. Now the interesting thing about this card is that effect stacks. So if you have 3 of these, each of them are giving each of them 3,000 power. So when one of them swings, your opponent can't intercept and he's getting plus 9,000 power. It's a pretty strong effect, if I do say so myself, and to get as many copies of her on the field as possible is probably the most ideal. And if you can get her onto a Excel gift marker, that is pretty useful for hitting those big numbers as well. Next up, we're moving on to the grade 2s, starting off with 4 Cup Bowler. Now, Cup Bowler is probably the most important card in the set because he can hit 14 on his own so long as there's another hero unit on the field. You may think that's not impressive, but in this deck, it's all about Vanguard attacks. And sometimes you're not going to have as many grade 1 units to boost your Vanguard. In those situations, you need to be able to hit force players because Royal Paladin and Kagero are probably going to be very popular in the meta for the first probably about 3 to 4 months. So being able to hit a Kagero Vanguard on his own and a Royal Paladin Vanguard on his own is very, very important. And if you have him on an Excel gift marker, he gains another 10k and he hits that 24 over the 23, making it at least a 15k guard. And if somehow you manage to stand this card, you can use him twice by triggering his effect, Battledore Fighter's effect on this one guy, because that lasts for the whole turn. Next up, we play 2 Extra Muscular. Just because this is a pretty good card, whenever it stands, it gains plus 3,000 power. Now you may think, again, kind of useless, but if you can get this card to stand, then it becomes a pretty powerful attacker. And the stand for the turn also counts as a stand. So, at the minimum, he'll be 12,000 power, able to hit most of your clan's rearguards. And most of your non-force vanguards. Next, we play 3 Boomerang Thrower. Now, you'd usually play maybe 4 of these, but because this deck really isn't that Counterblast heavy, you don't need that much Counterblast and Soul Charge, because his skill is very useful. When you call him to a rearguard, if you have 1 or less damage face up, you can countercharge 1, and if you have 1 or less soul inside your soul, you can Soul Charge 1. It's pretty useful. And next you have 2 Burst Riser, and for this card, if you have, when your Vanguard attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 and Counterblast 1, and he can stand again. And if your opponent has 4 or more damage, you gain plus 3000 power. It's pretty useful. Again, you can use him in conjunction with Battledore Fighter to get twice the effect of the opponent discarding 2 cards per attack. And if your opponent is at 5 damage, of course, they'll have to take every single attack. Next, we have to play, of course, the budget version has the 4 grade 1 perfect cards. Nothing much to say there. We also play 4 Death Army Guy. Now, unfortunately, Death Army Guy has no shield, which means you're dropping your total shield value of the deck by about 40,000 power. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the good thing about this card is that it boosts every 9k grade 2 to 18, which is that magic number that you want to hit all your force gift marker opponents. So pretty useful. And its second more important skill, I would say, is that if you ride him, and of course this is the ideal ride on grade 1, you prevent your opponent from rushing you at grade 1. So they can't just call a bunch of 8ks and then hope to beat you because you're base 9k. So even if their Vanguard is a base 8k, they have to draw 1 trigger to pass, and they can't pass that effect on to anyone else to attack you multiple times. Very useful card indeed. Last of all, we play 4 Rocket Hammerman, and his skill is Soul Blast 1. When it boosts a hero, you get plus 5,000 power. Again, very useful to just boosting your Vanguard and Rearguard's attacks to that high amount. And because this deck doesn't really use Soul, and you have that counter-charging, Soul Charging option, his skill doesn't really affect anything else. And of course, we talked about the hero archetype. Anytime you have a hero in the deck that's attacking with Miss Splendor, you are getting that 3000 power. So that counts for everything except the Burst Riser. So you have all these cards are heroes. And Rocket Hammerman is also a hero. So it's pretty useful, and I would dare say it is one of the better builds. Last of all, we're going to go through the triggers. We play, of course, 4 heals. No surprise there. And I actually play 8 front triggers. Now, front triggers are great because, first of all, they have 15k shield, so you don't have to balance it out in that sense, and that having that extra, instead of a draw trigger, let's say if I were running draw triggers, you would have to give up that 10k shield per card, but instead, we have this extra 40k shield to make up for those grade 1 Death Army guys. Second of all these cards are front triggers that work on both your opponent and your turn, which means if you damage check a front trigger, every single card in your front row is getting plus 10,000 power. And sometimes that means maybe they won't even be able to hit because they overestimate and they think they have a higher base power than you and they don't need to boost. But with this front trigger, suddenly they can't attack anything at all, not just swinging at a rear guard instead of Vanguard, making guarding a lot easier. Because one of the weaknesses of this deck is, of course, if you kill off all the rear guards, you're not going to be able to really form an attack against your opponent. And of course, it's a rush deck, so you want to rush them down. Last of all, we play 4 Shining Lady just as a critical trigger because I think most people will be assuming you run the draw triggers as perfect guards. And maybe they're like, okay, 4 damage, I can afford to take 1 damage. And then you top deck that critical trigger, so it's like a strategic advantage. If they don't know that you have the critical trigger, and they take a damage at 4 because they think, well, it's just going to be 1 and then I can guard the next attack, they're wrong. So that was the deck lineup for the full common and rare version. And next up, I'll be showing the slightly modified, slightly over budget, but still budget version of this deck. And up next, we have the slightly less budget version of the deck that I kind of threw together, and I'm going to be going forward with this deck. Now, if it looks like there's just a bunch of random foils in here, that's because there are. But I haven't tried this out, but it looks pretty good, and theory-wise, I think it'll work out pretty well. So the biggest change you'll see right off the bat is that I play 3 Twin Blader. Now, one of the reasons why you want to have 3 Twin Blader is because you want to reduce the number of grade 1s you have in your deck. Now, this sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but trust me, it'll make a lot of sense later. But Twin Blader is basically your perfect guard. If you drop a card, Nova Grappler card, you can block any Nova Grappler being attacked. Perfect guard, of course, unlimited damage. Unlimited power can still be blocked. And we still play, we play actually 6 front triggers because I still think that these are really, really good for defense and really, really good for throwing your opponent off, especially if you have multiple units attacking. The extra 10k power on multiple units really does help. And we play 3 because I still like that surprise factor that your opponent might not expect you to run crits, especially when they've seen 2 types of stands, a heal of course, which I play 4 of. Heals, draws, and two types of fronts, my bad. There's no more stand triggers, but they won't be expecting that crit even more. So next up, moving on to the grade 1s. If you want to, you can play the 1 extra Perfect Guard. In fact, since this deck is so fast and very rushy, you might not even want to play this 1 extra Perfect Guard. But it is a grade 1, and you still need a certain number of grade 1s in your deck. Next up, we still play the same 4 Death Army guy and the 4 Rocket Hammerman. Now, if you don't want to play that 1 grade 1 Perfect Guard, you can also opt for the grade 1 Razor Custom. Now, this unit is pretty good once a turn when this unit, or rather on the rear guard, let me talk about second skill first. It stands up whenever the unit in front of the column stands up. Now, one of the biggest problems about this deck is that when you attack once, your opponent gets a trigger, and then you can't attack even like a rear guard anymore because you are 9,000 power base. But if you can stand the rear guard behind it, it's pretty useful for attacking once more. So if that unit can stand and get another 8k boost, it goes at least to 17, or if it's a 12k attacker, it goes up again to 20 and allows you to hit rear guards for at least decent numbers. So if you have another one of that, you probably want to swap out for that. But we're moving on to grade 2s, and for the most part it's the same. We still play for Cup Bowler. We play 2 extra muscular. This time we're playing 4 Boomerang Throwers, and this will become very obvious why we do this in a little bit, just because we're going to be using more Counterblast in this deck. And we play 2 Burst Riser. I think that's Burst. Yep, Burst Riser. So, same effect as before. But now, we play 2 High-Powered Razor Custom. Now, you may be wondering, this is a pretty bad attack, but we're actually running Battle Riser on this deck. So, if you don't know what Battle Riser does, it's a typical when you ride on top of it, draw a card. But when High-Powered Razor Custom is called, you can call this unit up. I'm not sure if it has to be the same column or just any rear guard. But when this High-Powered Razor Custom's attack hits, you can send him to Soul, send a Battle Riser to Soul, and then choose one, Counterblast 1, send Battle Riser to Soul, and then choose one of your units to stand. And this just puts additional pressure on your opponent, making sure that they have to guard a card that's going to be attacking, or else they're going to be taking 1 additional damage from Battle Riser. And at worst, it gives your opponent something to focus on if they want to retire. If they want to retire your Battle Riser, they actually have to take more effort to do so. Now, like I said in the previous deck, Miss Splendor is actually the most important card in the deck because of her hero skills. Now, even though the number of heroes has pretty much stayed the same, the effect is still very useful because she herself is a hero, and Battledore Fighter, which I now play 2 of, is also a hero, and he's a 17k attacker most of the time. If you have just 1 of her on the board, he becomes immediately a 20k attacker, and she herself is always a 15, provided you have more rear guards. And last of all, I'm running 3 Asura Kaiser. Now, Asura Kaiser may not seem like a very cheap card, but even though it is a triple rare, it does not cost as much as the rest of the triple Rs. So you can probably afford a few copies of Asura Kaiser. Now, Asura Kaiser's skill is that when he drive checks a grade 2 or higher, you can stand a card, which is why, of course, we play more grade 2s and less grade 1s. And second skill, if a drive check a grade 3, you can Counterblast 1 and stand and give that unit that you just stood 10,000 power. Now, that's part of the reason why we're running so many grade 3s. Now, essentially, every single grade 3 you see here is an additional trigger in your deck. And while it can't be used to guard, you might as well drop them as fodder. For, like, if you get another Asura Kaiser, that makes actually pretty good Perfect Guard fodder. But if you get any of the other attacks, they're actually really strong attackers on the rear guard. And of course, each of the other grade 2s have their own skills, making them valuable cards in your deck. Now, this deck probably costs somewhere between, if you get the completely rare common version, it won't cost you more than like $15, $20. That is basically what you pay for a trial deck. If you just decide to add in a few of these cards, let me pull out all the actual foil cards, you'll realize that there really are only like a handful of foils, and these are not expensive at all. Nova Grappler is, of course, the cheapest card, the cheapest clan in the set. But hopefully this will bring you some fun games, and at the end of the day, if you can win a couple of games against the fully built Royal Paladin and Kagero decks, that's really all you need. And my philosophy is always, if you can have lots and lots of fun, the most amount of fun, for the cheapest price possible, go ahead and do that. But until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video and let me know by giving this video a like. Remember to subscribe, and until the next video, have fun and remember, it's okay to play casual.